So I'm sorry, I'll get the list out, I'll put it out, I'll give you guys a copy tomorrow. But I will put it, I'll post it, I'll make it today, but I just want to give you little copies of it. Maybe I have a few minutes in the class, I'll make the copies. And so the test, I know B days when we have it, you guys got to log in. It's just going to work out to be Thursday. I've talked to other students and they say that B days are the common days of tests.
We did all our tests while we were in class.
Oh, good. So you want to do B day? You excited? I thought it was the other way around. Maybe it's just for AP US history.
I don't know, but I thought August said something too about doing it the other way around.
August was just whining. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Sorry, August. They're on
What am I whining about?
I can't remember.
You're whining about stuff. Okay, we got that. Oh, okay. Sorry, you're not in AP US history. So let's do a little bit of the Reformation. And that's why I want to watch that, the day the universe changed, and it's good talk about printing press, Reformation, but also all the things that came out of that. I gotta admit, I really like how we did that. How we started with the computerized on a farm, how you get all this at the touch of a finger, that started with the printing press. And then it finishes with talking about cross-indexing, and that's how to aim artillery, which you can imagine is a big deal. And that ballistics would be a constant issue of how to aim artillery all the way to World War II, when the first real computer to compute numbers fast to aim anti-aircraft guns would come on. That's where the computer comes from. And so it kind of tied it all together, but also this idea that if we haven't lived it, what is real? And if we base reality, our morals on reality, what are our morals? Well, it's a really good way he did that. And I like how he had all that set up, and he did that in 1987. And he's really predicting problems we have right now. So that's one of the reasons I really like that chip. They're registering for next year. History. So I think we got the Luther. Just did a few things about this. Talk a little bit about the Reformation. Talk about Luther, Charles V, but then Zwingli, Calvin. I know Zwingli, and finish up with Henry VIII. And that's what. So we'll have that. That will be our last thing we talk about in class. Henry VIII, and then we'll have the test over that. And then I'll kind of split that unit in half, and then we'll do Elizabeth and the Spanish Armada, those religious wars. I'll save that for the next unit. We do all the wars and the scientific revolution. That'll be perfect. So, did we get to Luther and Augustinian month? Did we mention them?
We just got to this slide, I think.
And he was a teacher, a monk in Wittenberg, Germany. Very well educated, very well read, and he had been disturbed by a number of issues, but he had read us. He had read Wycliffe. So let's get back to that church corruption. We mentioned it before, but church corruption were the basic elements of what he complained about. Let me make sure I'm recording this. Am I recording? Beautiful. And we mentioned indulgences once before, and this is the selling of indulgence, but the printing press really made a big deal. They could just push these things out. Johann Tetzel was the one who went around the Holy Roman Empire. Tetzel selling indulgences was the trigger that would set Luther off. Because he was just basically bargain basement souls. You can save your soul with a few dollars. Indulgence was your way to buy yourself, by your relatives out of limbo. And they want to build St. Paul's or St. Peter's Cathedral, that sort of thing. But the other issues we got to get to, just a few more. Simony. It became a very common practice for the church to sell off positions. So, We've talked about this before with the manor houses, but they had the oldest son inherited the name, inherited the manor. So what do you do with the second or third sons? Well, buy them a bishopric. You pay the church, you make them a bishop. They got a position, they got rank, and that was a way to deal with that. And also, you want power, make yourself a bishop. And then pluralism. This is pretty common either as a reward to loyal families or just you want more positions. Buy yourself, you can be a cardinal, a bishop, buy a bunch of them. Plural offices purely as a way to take advantage of money. So the church had huge land holdings, massive land holdings, and you could profit from them. Also, family. The Borgia family would have a pope. They would put in various two close relatives were cardinals. Put your family members in key positions, or for that matter, kings would put their family members as bishops. And then morality. So speaking of the Borgias, Pope Alexander VI had a mistress, had many mistresses, had many children. He clearly was rigging the system for the Papal States to enrich his family. He was a Borgia. And that's a classic example of a corrupt pope. And he kind of made deals with the French to allow them in, the French would take power in Florence, things like that. But the morality issues. And also just the complete ignorance of many of the clergy. One of the big complaints were the actual clergy and the churches all over Europe had no idea what they were talking about. They had to do the services in Latin, and yet they didn't know even what most of the words meant. They just memorized words, and their flock, those at church, would repeat them back, and nobody knew what they were talking about. And so there's this real idea that no one's really understanding what it meant to be saved, for example. So, for example, you ever heard the term hocus pocus? Hocus pocus. Well, it would come to mean magic, but it fit in with the ignorance of clergy. Because one of the most important parts of the Eucharist or the communion service in the Catholic Church was to say, this is my body, or hocus corpus manum. And that's where hocus pocus came from. Because they would say this, and nobody knew what they meant, but it must be some kind of religious magic. And that's where hocus pocus comes from. There are other elements of this too. By the way, it would be until, only about 60 years ago that the Catholic Church started doing many of those, allowing for all their sermons to be in whatever the local language is. They still would have to do a significant amount in Latin. It was a big controversy when they switched. And so these are the church corruption. This is the selling of indulgences. So this is what he was complaining about. And so that is why on October 31st, in direct response to Johann Tetzel, I sometimes get anglified as Jonathan. In Wittenberg, the story is that Luther put up his 95 arguments, called the 95 Theses, and nailed it to the cathedral wall in Wittenberg. And really neat cathedral. It survived the war for the most part. And the big complaint were the indulgences. But he also questioned the Pope's authority. I should add, this picture shows him nailing to it like it's a big controversy. It was pretty common to announcements, grievances would be nailed to the wall, to the door of the cathedral. But he probably actually didn't do that. He probably just wrote a letter and sent it. But it turned into this dramatic nailing of it. So, not that it matters too much. But at first, and here it is in Latin, the Pope didn't think it was that big of a deal. He thought it was a disagreement between the two major monastic movements, the Augustinian versus the Dominicans. That's what he thought it was. So these monks are fighting over just ways to interpret church. It wasn't that big of a deal. It would not be for another year before he realized what a direct effect on the Pope's authority. And the reason why was there's all that fighting between France and and Spain over Italy. They're fighting right at that time. The empire, these princes here, didn't want to pay taxes to pay for that war. And so they were looking for a way to break away and not pay taxes to keep more wealth there. So he didn't realize how the princes would take this combined with this whole printing press thing. So in 1520, when the realization hit that this was becoming a major movement in Leipzig, it's called the Disputation of Leipzig, but it's basically where Luther had to go and defend his ideas to church elders. And this is Luther right here, and he would have to answer to the church represented by Johann Eck. And when Luther first went in there, he talked about the church has authority, but under cross-examination by Eck, his true feelings came out that the Pope does not have true authority. The Pope does not have authority. The Pope, because of the power of the church, gave himself the authority, but it's not real. And it's not the path of salvation. This is heresy to the church. This could break down their entire structure, and they knew it. So, he said that the Bible was the sole authority. Does that make sense? Not the Pope, not a person. And this would inspire German princes all throughout to begin to rally towards Luther. Here is a way we could break away from the yoke, not just of the church, but the emperor. And we'll come back to the emperor in just a second, but the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. They could break away and start following Luther. So some might have believed it. Some might have been very calculating and cynical, like, this is a way for me to break away. And don't forget, the church has all this land. If the church loses authority, who gets the land? They do. And there's over 1,000 principalities, city-states, kingdoms, duchies, all over this massive area. So it's not really a country per se. It's got a border, but it's much more complex than that. They're relatively independent. The emperor has authority, but it's relatively independent. So the Pope would respond to Luther with a bull. A bull is a papal command, saying Luther has got to toe the line. And what did Luther do? He burned it. That is a formal break with the church. So a bull is basically telling Luther he must toe the line. And when that happened, oops. So we got that the papal burn. So, back to the printing press. Why was it such a big deal? Everybody read what Luther said. Other people interpreted what Luther said. Other people interpreted also the Pope, the bull, the papal bull was spent out. Why? The printing press. Because by 1500, there were print shops all over the Holy Roman Empire. In fact, this would be the center of printing. The Holy Roman Empire. These are the numbers where the printing press would come in. So Leipzig, where this happened, the printing press has already been there for 20 years. So this information spread like wildfire. Everybody read this and read the cartoons and the etchings. That's one thing I liked, why I wanted to show the day the universe changed. When he showed how they would make these etchings and cartoons and people could read and follow the pictures. And they are, Luther was a great artist of these cartoons. If you go to the German History Museum in Berlin, they have all of his cartoons there. And they're all pretty earthy. I'll just leave it at that, earthy. He's kind of gross, but they're also funny. So, and don't forget, now they said it in German, and there's Luther's Bible. Why I put the exclamation points, I don't know. But Luther put translated the Bible to German. It spread throughout Germany because of the printing press and the vernacular. And this is the printing press in the museum in Berlin, and that's from Berlin. That's one of his Bibles. And this gave Germany a sense of, we are German. We have a common language. And I should add, I've mentioned this before, but he learned down here in Württemberg, and Württemberg right here, also spent time down here. And by elevation, this is Upper German or High German because it's higher elevation. This is Lower German because it's closer to the water, so it's low elevation. So the first vernacular German was High German. And I always thought high meant like elite. But it's not that, it's just elevation. But that, if you go to Germany, there are definitely different dialects. And, okay, I did take 2 years of German in college. I had to for history degree, and I still can't speak. It's so hard if you don't get a chance to actually talk to people. But I was still up there when I've been here and then went down here. It's noticeable difference. And my sister-in-law, who married a Berliner, so we went down to Munich with them. And I thought, they speak it wrong. They speak German wrong. They're not real Germans. It was actually really funny. So with that, we don't have those kind of big differences in dialect here. If you go to Georgia, it's exactly like here. So in 1521, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, but also the King of Spain, I'll come back to him, but Charles V decided to have an imperial meeting. What's the word for a meeting, or like a congress? A diet. And so sometimes you see legislatures called a diet. And he had a meeting of church leaders where Luther had to come defend himself. And here's the thing, Charles is desperately trying to tamp this down. Charles does not want dissension. He's fighting the French, he's fighting the Ottomans, he has a war in the Netherlands. All Charles V did is fight. So, Luther will not recant. Under the punishment of being excommunicated and burned at the stake. He's threatened with this, even though Luther did not, or Charles did not want to burn at the stake. Not because he was this, I don't want to kill somebody that way. No, that wasn't it. He knew that a lot of princes were like Luther. Who knows how they might react? He wanted Luther to recant and let the movement die that way, so he didn't have war in the Holy Roman Empire. He's already has war every place else. So, against the advice of other people, the eating of worms, of verms, because we're Germans now, we're speaking the vernacular, they branded Luther a heretic. And heretics get burned at the stake. So there is a chance he could be burned at the stake. Doesn't mean he will be, but now basically this is a massive threat, not just to Luther, but any of those princes that followed him and anybody else. And as Luther was leaving, an ally, the Elector of Saxony, kidnapped Luther and held him in his castle to protect him. They had said that he kidnapped him, but in reality it was kind of a fake kidnapping, so to bring him to the castle so Charles could not get him. Now, we don't have time, and I don't think it's important for us to know all the issues of the Holy Roman Empire, but I'll just say this very quickly. The biggest kingdoms, at least the biggest in 1000, they elected the emperor. The biggest ones, like Saxony, they elected and picked the emperor. Frederick of Saxony, and Saxony, right here, of Saxony, he was one of the electors. So there'd be like a Palatine, would be an elector, right here, a Brandenburg, that kind of thing. They're the ones who elected the emperor, and they elected Charles V. So they had a little bit of autonomy. This was not an absolute monarchy, even though Charles V wanted that. And so with that, in it, Luther would finally lay out his theology. Okay. Here. This is a wild Protestant one with the King of England holding the pencil for Luther, spreading the Reformation. That is a wild cartoon. It's basically all European politics in 1550. In fact, I don't even need to say anymore. I just give you this and you guys can interpret it. It's actually really funny, these political cartoons, they became very adept at that. And it looks really confusing to us. They got used to reading those kind of things. It was just the norm. So, first off, Luther's theology was a radical shift from the dogma of the Catholic Church, which goes all the way back to the Council of Nicaea, when Constantine the Great was Emperor of Rome. And it said salvation comes from faith. Faith, not good works. Good works were the things that you could do through the church. What the church tells you, can also even, and that includes also confession, but it could also be like for the very wealthy building hospitals, which are places for building a hospital today, more like for wealthy people to go and be careful as they get older. But you can't just buy your way in. Good works won't do it, because they thought good works was like bribing. You know, you commit a bunch of sins and then you give some money to the poor so I can go to heaven. No, you have to show legitimate faith. Now, there's a problem with that. What does that even mean? I mean, there's gray areas here. And a lot of the authority the church had was by saying, you do what we tell you or you'll go to hell. So the church has power because people don't want to go to hell. Next, the Bible is the sole authority. For whatever reason, I got tired and wrote an abbreviated authority. I just couldn't type those last 5 letters. Okay, so the Bible is sole authority. And here's the thing. Remember the ignorance in the church? If no one knew what they're talking about the Bible, who really has authority? So that means, first off, the vernacular. The Bible has got to be in languages that people read, but this also implies people need to be educated. And please put that down. The Bible as sole authority means education. People have got to be able to read the Bible. Because how can you be saved and have faith if you don't know what you're committing yourself to? If you don't know what that means? It's no coincidence that you're going to get, or the literacy rates are going to go up dramatically during the Reformation. Also, all the other dogma of the church, of the Catholic Church, and what's still the church, are not important. The only 2 sacraments, which are the most sacred elements of church theology, the only ones that matter, baptism, which generally happen not long after birth, and communion. Communion is also called the Eucharist, and that is was a very important ceremony in the Catholic Church, but also would be for Lutheran Church, where the communion, the Eucharist, is where followers would eat bread and wine representing the body and blood of Christ. That was an important element of now the Catholic Church, but Lutheran says this is legit. That is your way to actually communicate with Christ. This is important because this will become a big controversial issue down the road. Which, by the way, once again, that's a lot of stuff the church wanted out the window. And what that meant then is it's not a church hierarchy. It's a priesthood of believers. And that implies that everybody who converts in this way to what's going to be called the Lutheran Church in about 10 years after this are relatively equal to this priesthood of all believers. So the old hierarchy of the church, and that goes from the Pope all the way down, is not legitimate. And so that not only is a massive attack on the church, it's also a massive attack on every king or every duke or whatever it might be who claim to get their authority from the church. It's a big deal. The priesthood of believers. Is this an eel? What is that, eel? Who's that eel? You've had eel?
No, looks like it.
I've had eel once. Tastes like eel. Exactly like the way you think eel would taste.
I thought it tastes like chicken.
It's really, I tried, you're out someplace like, okay, I'll do it. And it's like, it actually didn't taste bad, but it was really stringy. Because it's basically just one big muscle, you know. And the place we're eating, eels are, and they're kind of,
Yeah.
snakes bother me, eels bother me even more. Somebody else have eel? And I know too, when I was in Germany, people go out into the rivers near Berlin and fish for them. Think about pulling the eel up. Okay.
Mr.
So,
Partridge,
yes.
out of curiosity, what were the other sacraments?
To go through all the Catholic sacraments would be, God, I'm not sure of all of them, to tell you the truth, because I'm trying to remember the last time I've been in a Catholic service. But the sacraments were a certain prayers you had to give every single time you did communion. Another sacrament would be the confession. Another sacrament would be last rites. Another sacrament would be confirmation. So all those.
Okay.
And I should add, the Lutheran Church will have confirmation. They just don't have it the same weight, the same meat to it. But if you go, it's actually kind of confusing for people. I've gone to a couple Catholic sermons, but I'm not Catholic. But it was really confusing for me because I'm just not used to it. If you're Catholic, that's just the norm. My wife was raised Catholic. She's not now, but she was raised, and it was like, yeah, that's just what we did. That's what you do. So with that, what's got? So the Reform, and he can try to get German princes, Reform, aka join me. And lastly, the monastic ideas, also that fit in with the clergy, that you must give yourself completely, almost like marriage to God, of poverty, chastity, so that means no marriage, and obedience. He rejected those because he said that was a way to control people through human means and not through faith. So he's going to get married. That was a big deal. Now, should I remember those popes, bishops? They had mistresses, and some even had wives, they had kids, but they all acted like they didn't do it. And he said that's ridiculous. You should be allowed to get married. And this is actually an issue to the Catholic Church today, because priests, monks cannot be married. Nuns cannot be married. And so, in 1525, he would marry Katerina von Bora. And because he was in hiding, they snuck her to him the first time so they can meet. Don't bog yourself down with how they got married. In a barrel of fish. I don't want to talk about the smell, but part of it was to mask it in, but no one's going to look into a barrel of fish. So they snuck her in and they would be married. By the way, these are both pictures from about 1535. Don't they look almost like they could be related? And this was the time you married your cousins a lot, because it's hard to go any place and meet other people, but still, they weren't cousins, at least directly. So with that, just a couple more things about Lutheran. Let's get to Charles V. Charles V was the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. That's how long he lived, but he was emperor. Okay, actually he became the head of Spanish Netherlands in 1506. He was 6 years old. But through various marriages of I didn't type this in. I'm sorry, I forgot to type something in. His family name was Habsburg. So this was the Habsburg dynasty. And there were Habsburgs by very clever marriages. He was able to he would be the heir to the throne of Spain. He was the heir to the kingdom of Naples, which was right here. That's called the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, which included Sardinia. He was also, through marriage, of Spanish Netherlands, and a couple other spots in the Holy Roman Empire, and the biggie of Austria. So he is, by very clever marriages by the Habsburgs, generally cousins marrying cousins, all these intermarried couples, he would have this massive empire. So that's Charles V. We mentioned him once before, because he was emperor when Cortez took the Aztec Empire, when Pizarro took Peru, when Piazzi would be discovered. So he would have a whole new Spain. A massive empire. And Inbreeding. The artist is trying to make him look better. Don't forget that. So with that, he had this massive empire, and we already mentioned that. I got to talk one more time again, and he was having these wars with France. And these wars would last 30 years. Constant war with France over Italy, over the Mediterranean. The empire would bounce back and forth. Charles V had constant war. And he wanted to make sure that the Holy Roman Empire, because he is now the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, he wanted to make sure that it was Catholic. He wanted this to be strongly Catholic, partially because he saw we have to go crusade against all heretics, but also, if he's going to be fighting the French, he doesn't want this to potentially ally with the French. And they're having a crusade against the Ottoman Turks, against the Muslims. Do you get the point here? He's constantly at war. Now, Charles V, he's going to try to tie all these things together. And he is going to be, he's getting all of the silver and gold from the Aztec Empire, from the Inca Empire, from the silver mines. But he uses that as collateral to fight these wars. He's constantly in debt. And it's one of the paradoxes of wealth that happens all the time. When you have wealth, a lot of the time you think you're going to have more wealth tomorrow. So why not go all out and use your current wealth as collateral so I can really get big? The problem is, what happens if you don't get that big? Then you got to pay it all back. When he would finally abdicate his throne in 1555, his empire was broke, and he'd have to split it up. He'd give Spain to his son, and the Holy Roman Austria and the Holy Roman Empire to his brother. It was just too big, too much debt. But just a couple more things in for today. So, remember I talked about inbreeding? That's his chin. Look at that coin. The Habsburg chin. So he had, if you ever wondered, what's an underbite? That is an underbite. And
He's a looker.
It's what?
He's a looker.
Woo! And here's the thing. And I guess his jaw swollen, the teeth didn't move. So he had trouble eating. And his great-great-great-grandson, for example, couldn't chew. Couldn't eat. They had to kind of feed him this gruel. But he was a monarch, and you're stuck with who you have. Cousins marrying cousins. Part of the way he got all these power, all these dynastic marriages where they just married your first cousin. So, don't marry your first cousin. Wow, there's a noble stand. So a couple things in first. Not supposed to be brother. So as Charles V is fighting in Italy, he left the Holy Roman Empire to his father, his brother Ferdinand, his younger brother. His younger brother was 18 in 1525, so he's a little bit younger. And Ferdinand was more conciliatory than Charles. Ferdinand did not want war either. And so, oops, I was going to type something in here, but let me just get this, type this down. Ferdinand basically allowed the princes to have, to practice Lutheranism. But when Charles came back on the scene, Charles tried to crack down. So here's a little bit of tolerance, but they got more entrenched. Luther. And so with that, we're coming to what's called the Schmalkian League. When Charles tried to crack down, the Lutheran princes all unified. And that's the first time you're going to see the term Protestant, as they were protesting against Charles V trying to dictate them to become Catholics or go back and do that church. And almost immediately, what did the Schmalkian League do of all these Protestant? They start to take church land. And other kingdoms, ooh, if we can get this land and get more wealth. And The nobles like this too, because that means they have to pay less taxes because we're taking it from the church. A guy named Henry VIII is watching this carefully and going, oh, that sounds good. And so we'll come back to the Schmalkian Lake. There's a little town here, right about here, called Schmalkien. It's German. So, we'll come right there. I'll get to the peasant revolt tomorrow. Do a little bit of the peasant revolt, a few other things, finish it up. Sound good? And all this talk about personal faith and implied freedom. So the peasant's like, oh, I can be free? No. No. All right. So let me finish up this review, and I'll get this out as quickly as possible to all of you in TV land. So tomorrow I'll have the list out. I'll put it online with tomorrow's post, and I'll give you guys a copy right now.